everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you might be dialing in from around the world. Thank you all for joining us for today's webinar, Driving Data Strategic Planning and Maturity. I'm Michaela Bernier, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. Before we begin, I just want to cover a few quick housekeeping items. Today's webinar will be recorded, and a link to view the recording on demand will be available after the session. Please feel free to submit your questions using the questions feature located in the GoToWebinar toolbar to the right of your screen, and we will address them at the end of the session. I'm now going to turn the mic over to Mitch Ween to introduce himself and the panelists and lead us into today's content. Thank you again for joining us, and we hope you enjoyed today's webinar.
Hi, thanks, Kayla. This is Mitch Ween, and you're here with IT Novarica webinar on driving data strategic planning and maturity. With us, we have Christine Barry, who's the head of banking and payments, and Madhu Reddy, who's the CIO of Republic Bank of Chicago. Next slide. For those folks that may not know us, IT Novarica Group is an advisory firm providing mission-critical insights on technology, regulations, market, and operations to hundreds of banks, insurers, payment providers, and investment firms, as well as the technology and service providers that support them. We are uniquely positioned to provide advice and counsel because we comprise former senior technology, strategy, and operations executives, as well as experienced researchers and consultants. Next slide. So before we go any further, we're required to show this antitrust statement. So we'll just take a minute, if you wouldn't mind reading this. At the end, we, of course, will have questions, as we do with all of our webinars, but please be mindful of this as you ask those questions. Next slide. So just more introductions. Next slide. With us is Madhu Reddy, as I indicated before, the CIO of Republic Bank of Chicago. Madhu, if you'd like to introduce your background.
Thank you, Mitch, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. Madhu Reddy, I'm currently serving as the CIO at Republic Bank of Chicago, which is based in Chicago and has been in banking for over 5 decades. In general, I have been in banking technology for the last 23 years. Prior to the current bank, I was at the top 50 bank for close to 14 years. One of the things, if I look back all my 23 years in career, I think data is one of those things that always has been a key focus for me in spite of doing different things or wearing with different hats. And interestingly enough, was actually when I started my career in 2000, and actually I started in the data space as a data warehouse manager, which I know the word data warehouse is nobody uses it anymore because it's all about data analytics. But I really, in terms of that's right, I'm always passionate about from data and in terms of how it can be truly a source of competitive advantage in terms of not just how effectively can you run your business, but in terms of how you can really provide compelling products and experiences to your customers. I live in Chicago, so that's home. So I'm certainly by default a Bears and a Cubs fan, and really excited to be here and share and learn from all the attendees, and look forward to an engaging session.
Thank you, Madhu. Next slide. Okay, so today we're going to cover a number of topics. We'll look at consumer and business customer expectations. Then we'll kind of get into what the problem is with data, the definition of that problem and the need. Then we'll talk about best practices around producing a data strategy checklist. We'll discuss various data initiatives and how to sequence them. We'll explore data governance and best practices there. And then we'll talk about data mastery and what that may imply. And then finally, we'll conclude, and then we'll have some Q&A at the end. To begin, Christine will take us into a further deep dive in consumer and business customer expectations.
Thank you, Mitch. It's a pleasure to be a part of today's webinar, especially on such an important topic. Data truly represents the future of the financial services industry, yet so many banks and credit unions, even though they sit on piles of data, so much of it goes underutilized. I'm also excited about the format of today's webinar. We'll be focusing most of the attention today on some of the technology implications, focusing on the role of the CIO, CTO type persona as far as data is concerned. But I'll be spending the next 10 minutes or so taking one step back and looking at why these mandates are in place, what customers are actually asking about and expecting, and the implication that that's having on some of the expectations and the needs and the direction that data needs to move in.